In 1954, a fifth grader in Ohio could recite the Gettysburg Address from memory, diagram a sentence in under a minute, and write in flowing cursive that looked almost machine perfect. Today, most kids can't even read that same cursive. Somewhere between then and now, American schools quietly dropped entire subjects that once shaped every child who walked through their doors. Some vanished because the world changed. Others disappeared because someone in an office decided they no longer mattered. Number 3 on this list was once considered so essential that no student could graduate without it, and today it's nearly gone. We're counting down 15 forgotten school subjects every 1950s kid learned that schools dropped forever. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button. Let's start with number 15. Number 15, nature study. Before science came from a textbook, it came from the window. In the grade schools of the early 1950s, nature study opened the morning with something you could hold in your hand. Children pressed maple leaves between sheets of wax paper, kept jars of tadpoles on the classroom sill, and filled small notebooks with drawings of the robins nesting outside. Teachers led whole classes out to the schoolyard to watch clouds, name the trees, and note the first frost. It was learning that smelled like grass and pond water. Report cards from the era listed nature study right alongside reading and arithmetic, a subject as ordinary as chalk. Its whole purpose was attention, teaching a child to look closely at the living world and record what was really there. Then came October of 1957, when the Soviets launched Sputnik. Panic swept through American education, and gentle observation suddenly looked like a luxury the nation could not afford. Nature study was swept aside for rigorous, standardized science, built around chemistry sets and formulas. The leaf presses were packed away. The nature journals stopped. What replaced them taught children about the world without ever asking them to step outside and see it. Number 14, elocution and recitation. There was a time when a child stood, squared their shoulders, and spoke a poem into a silent classroom. Elocution was the art of speaking well, and recitation was its weekly test. Children memorized the village blacksmith, passages of Shakespeare, and the great American speeches, then delivered them with careful pauses and clear vowels. Teachers drilled diction and projection until a bashful 10-year-old could fill a room. In the 1950s, Friday afternoon recitations were a fixture in classrooms from Maine to California, a ritual as familiar as the flag salute. Parents came to hear their children speak on the last day of term, beaming when a boy made it through all 4 verses without a stumble. The skill built poise that lasted a lifetime, teaching a generation to look an audience in the eye. Yet, as progressive education spread, memorized recitation came to be seen as mindless, a relic of drilling and repetition. Educators favored self-expression over set pieces, and the poems slipped out of the lesson plan. By the 1970s, few children were asked to memorize anything at all. The confident young speaker, once the pride of the schoolroom, became a rarity, and the spoken word gave way to the mumbled book report. Number 13, slide rule instruction. Long before a calculator fit in a pocket, the answer to a hard problem slid back and forth between 2 strips of marked wood. The slide rule was the workhorse of American mathematics, and learning to use one was a rite of passage in high schools across the country. Students learned to line up the scales, read the cursor, and coax square roots and logarithms out of a device with no batteries and no buttons. A good rule cost a few dollars and hung from the belt of every serious engineering student like a badge. In the classrooms of the 1950s, teachers chalked enormous slide rules onto the blackboard, guiding rows of teenagers through calculations that trained the mind to estimate and to reason. You had to understand the math before the tool would help you. There was pride in the click and slide, in trusting your own judgment about where the decimal belonged. Then, in the early 1970s, the electronic pocket calculator arrived and killed the slide rule almost overnight. Within a few years, the scales that had built the highways, the bridges, and the rockets of a nation were gathering dust in desk drawers. The calculator gave answers faster, but it asked the student to understand nothing at all. Number 12. Gregg shorthand. In the business wing of every 1950s high school, pencils flew across narrow ruled pages in a language of loops and curves that looked like nothing at all. Gregg shorthand was a system of symbols that let a trained hand capture speech as fast as a person could talk. And for millions of young women, it was the ticket to a steady career. Students practiced the strokes until the shapes flowed automatically, taking dictation at 100 words a minute or more. 250,000 students studied it each year, filling notebooks with graceful shorthand that only they could read back. The skill meant independence, a paycheck, a place in the office when few other doors stood open. Teachers timed the drills with a stopwatch, and the fastest writers wore their speed like a medal. Yet shorthand lived and died with the dictating boss. As tape recorders, then word processors, and finally the personal computer took over the office, the need to capture speech by hand simply evaporated. By the 1990s, the classes had all but disappeared. Today, the elegant symbols survive only in the notebooks of retirees, a private script that fewer and fewer people alive can still decode. Number 11. Sight singing and music appreciation. Music class in the 1950s did not mean listening to a record. It meant standing up and making the notes yourself. Children learned to read a staff, to sing do-re-mi from a printed page, and to find a pitch cold from a teacher's little round pitch pipe. Sight singing trained the ear and the voice together so that a room full of 8-year-olds could hold a 3-part round without a piano to lean on. The national anthem, the old hymns, the folk songs of the country were passed down not as recordings but as living things the children could produce with their own throats. There was discipline in it, and joy, too, in the moment a class locked onto a chord and the sound filled the room. Music appreciation ran alongside it, teaching students the great composers and how to truly listen. But as school budgets tightened through the following decades, music was among the first subjects to be cut. Sight singing, which took patience and daily practice, faded into occasional listening lessons. Today, many schools have no music program at all. A skill that once let ordinary children read and sing, music at sight has become the specialty of a trained few. Number 10. Mechanical drawing. In a quiet room lined with slanted tables, students bent over sheets of paper with T-squares, compasses, and hard pencils sharpened to a needlepoint. Mechanical drawing, or drafting, taught the precise visual language of engineering, and in the 1950s, it was a cornerstone of the high school for any boy headed toward industry. Students learned to render an object in exact scale, to letter in a clean uniform hand, and to think in 3 dimensions on a flat page. Every line meant something. A drawing had to be so precise that a machinist across the country could build the part from it without ever speaking to the person who drew it. The drafting room smelled of pencil shavings and eraser dust, and there was deep satisfaction in a finished plate, crisp and true. This was the skill that designed the cars, the appliances, and the buildings of post-war America. Then, the computer arrived. Computer-aided design software could draw faster and revise in an instant, and the drafting tables were folded up and carted away. By the 1990s, the T-square was a museum piece. The trade survived, but the hand skill, the patient discipline of drawing a machine by eye and instrument, quietly left the schoolhouse for good. Number 9. Deportment and etiquette. Once, schools graded a child not only on what they knew, but on how they carried themselves. Deportment covered posture, manners, and conduct, and it appeared as its own line on the report card, right there in ink for parents to see. Children learned to stand when an adult entered the room, to shake hands and look a person in the eye, to set a proper table and write a thank you note by hand. Girls practiced walking with a book balanced on the head. Boys learned to remove a hat indoors and pull out a chair. Teachers corrected slouching with a tap on the shoulder and expected "yes, ma'am" and "no, sir" without exception. In the 1950s, this was not thought of as fussy. It was simply the grease that let a crowded society run smoothly, a shared code that told a child how to move through the world with grace. But the culture shifted. By the late 1960s, rigid rules of conduct came to feel old-fashioned, even oppressive, and schools stepped back from teaching manners as a subject at all. The report card line for deportment disappeared. What was once taught deliberately became something children were simply expected to pick up on their own and often did not. Number 8. Bookkeeping. In the days before software balanced the books, a person did it by hand, and they learned how in high school. Bookkeeping taught the double-entry ledger, that ancient discipline where every dollar in one column had to match a dollar in another, or the whole page was wrong. Students worked in bound ledger books with red and blue rules, entering debits and credits in a careful hand, footing the columns, and hunting down the single penny that threw everything off. In the 1950s, bookkeeping was one of the most practical courses a school offered, a straight path to a job at the bank, the store, or the front office of any business in town. It taught more than arithmetic. It taught order, honesty, and the patience to track every cent through a maze of accounts. A neat, balanced ledger was a small work of art, yet the electronic spreadsheet changed everything. When a computer could add a column instantly and never make an error, the reason to teach the hand method faded. Accounting software swallowed the rest. The green ledger books were retired, and with them went a generation's deep, tactile understanding of exactly where the money went and why the numbers had to agree. Number 7. Latin. For centuries, the mark of an educated person, Latin filled the classrooms of American high schools well into the 1950s, and students conjugated their way through amo, amas, amat before they were old enough to drive. It was called a dead language, but in the schoolroom, it was very much alive. Students memorized declensions, translated Caesar and Cicero, and learned the Roman roots that lay beneath half the words they spoke every day. Teachers argued, with good reason, that Latin sharpened the mind like nothing else, training students in logic, grammar, and the discipline of exact meaning. It opened the door to law, medicine, and science, where its vocabulary still ruled. In its heyday, Latin was among the most commonly taught languages in American schools. But the post-war world looked outward, and modern living languages like Spanish and French promised more obvious use. Enrollment slid year after year, and as budgets tightened, the Latin teacher was often the first position a district chose not to fill. By the 1970s, the classes had thinned to a shadow of their former size. Today, Latin survives in a handful of schools as a point of pride, but the ancient tongue that once trained the American mind has largely gone silent. Number 6. Sentence diagramming. On the blackboards of the 1950s, sentences were taken apart and rebuilt as pictures. Diagramming was the visual grammar that turned a jumble of words into a clean skeleton of lines and branches, and every school child learned it. The subject sat on the main line, the verb followed, and the modifiers dropped away on slanted supports beneath, each word in its rightful place. Teachers drilled it daily, and children learned to see the hidden architecture of language, to understand exactly why a sentence worked or why it fell apart. There was a strange satisfaction in it, a puzzle-like pleasure in fitting every word onto its proper line until the whole structure hung together. Grammar was not a matter of opinion. It had bones, and diagramming showed you where they were. But as the decades passed, education researchers questioned whether diagramming actually made anyone a better writer, and the exercise came to be seen as tedious drilling for its own sake. Schools quietly dropped it. Grammar instruction itself grew loose and inconsistent. Today, most students have never diagrammed a single sentence, and many teachers could not do it either. The elegant diagrams that once mapped the logic of English have faded from the blackboard entirely. Number 5. Mental arithmetic. Before the calculator, the machine was the mind, and schools trained it hard. Mental arithmetic taught children to add, subtract, multiply, and divide entirely in the head, quickly and without error. Teachers ran lightning drills, firing off problems while students raced to answer, and the whole class chanted the times tables until they were burned in for life. A grocer's son could total an order faster than a modern register. A 10-year-old could make change without a moment's thought. In the 1950s, this was simply expected, the foundation on which all other math was built. The drills demanded focus, and the reward was a kind of quiet confidence, the knowledge that your own head was equal to any everyday sum the world could throw at you. Then two things happened. The cheap electronic calculator made mental math seem unnecessary, and the reform movement known as the New Math shifted the focus toward abstract concepts over drill and practice. The daily chant of the times tables faded. Speed and fluency were no longer prized. Today, many adults reach for a phone to split a dinner check, and the swift, sure mental arithmetic that once belonged to every school child has become a party trick rather than a basic skill. Number 4. Home economics. In a bright classroom fitted with sewing machines and small kitchen stations, students learned the enormous, invisible labor of running a household. Home economics taught cooking, sewing, budgeting, nutrition, and the 100 practical skills that kept a family fed and clothed. Students followed recipes from scratch, learned to read a pattern and hem a seam, planned a week of balanced meals on a tight budget, and even studied the basics of caring for an infant. In the 1950s, it was among the most common courses in the country, and while it was aimed largely at girls, it carried real weight, a serious subject about the real economics of daily life. The classroom smelled of baking bread and machine oil, and there was genuine pride in a finished dress or a meal cooked for the family. These were not small skills. They were the difference between a household that ran and one that struggled. Yet as women moved into the workforce in growing numbers and old gender roles came under fire, home economics fell out of favor. Budgets shrank the programs and many were renamed and hollowed out. Today, a generation raised on takeout and store-bought clothes has never learned to cook a meal from scratch or sew on a button, and the practical wisdom of the home has largely left the school. Number 3. Shop class. Down the hall from the quiet reading rooms was a space that hummed and roared, thick with the smell of sawdust and hot metal. Shop class, or industrial arts, put real tools in young hands and taught them to build. Students learned woodworking on the lathe, metalworking at the forge, and the basics of engines and electricity. Turning out birdhouses, bookshelves, and lamps they carried home with pride. In the 1950s, shop was a fixture of nearly every school, a place where a student who struggled with books could discover they were brilliant with their hands. It taught measurement, patience, safety, and the deep confidence that comes from making something real and useful out of raw material. A well-built project was proof, held in the hands, that effort produced results. But the ground shifted. Rising insurance costs made the power tools a liability, tight budgets made the equipment expensive to maintain, and a growing push to send every student to a four-year college branded the trades as second class. One by one, the shops were shut and the rooms converted to computer labs. Today, many schools have no shop at all, and a generation that can navigate a phone with ease cannot hang a shelf. The hands-on skills that built the country have been all but erased from the schoolhouse. Number 2, civics. Before a student could vote, they were taught exactly what voting meant, and the subject was called civics. It was the serious, deliberate study of how the American government works and what it asks of its citizens. Students learned how a bill becomes a law, memorized the branches of government, studied the Constitution and the Bill of Rights line by line, and discussed the duties that came with the freedoms they had inherited. In the 1950s, Civics was often a required course considered too important to leave to chance because a self-governing republic depends entirely on citizens who understand it. Teachers ran mock elections and staged debates, and students left the class knowing not just their rights, but their responsibilities. It was the subject that turned children into citizens. Yet over the following decades, civics was quietly folded into a broader, vaguer social studies, its hours squeezed thin. As standardized testing came to dominate the school day, subjects that were not tested lost their place, and dedicated civics was among the casualties. Today, surveys routinely find that large numbers of American adults cannot name the three branches of their own government. The subject that once deliberately built an informed citizenry has faded, and a democracy that depends on understanding itself now largely trusts its citizens to figure it out alone. Number 1. Penmanship and the Palmer Method. And finally, in first place, the subject that touched every single child who ever sat in a 1950s classroom, penmanship. Under the famous Palmer Method, handwriting was not an afterthought but a daily discipline, drilled with the seriousness of arithmetic. Children filled entire pages with endless rows of ovals and push-pull strokes, moving the whole forearm rather than the fingers, until a smooth, uniform cursive flowed almost without thought. Teachers walked the aisles watching posture and grip, and a beautiful hand was a source of real pride, a mark of care and character that followed a person through life. Millions of Americans learned to write this way, and for decades their letters, their ledgers, and their love notes carried the same graceful, slanting script. The daily practice trained patience, precision, and self-control as much as it trained the hand. But the ballpoint pen, the typewriter, and finally the computer keyboard chipped away at the reason for it. When new national standards in the 2010s dropped any requirement to teach cursive, the last support gave way. Today, many children never learn it at all, and a growing number cannot even read the handwriting of their own grandparents. Of everything on this list, penmanship is the one that connected every hand in every classroom, and it has slipped away most completely of all. From the pressed leaves of nature study to the flowing loops of the Palmer Method, these 15 subjects once shaped every child who passed through an American school. They taught skills you could hold in your hands and carry for a lifetime. Which of these do you wish they still taught today? Tell me in the comments, and if this brought back a memory, you know what to do.